I never thought I'd be sitting here, heart pounding against my ribs, wondering if I'm the villain in my own life story, or if I finally did what had to be done to survive my own flesh and blood. Imagine waking up one morning in the house you spent 30 years paying for, the house where you raised your children and tucked them into bed, only to find the locks changed and your suitcases sitting on the wet gravel of the driveway like trash waiting for pickup. My own daughter, the girl I carried, the girl I sacrificed every luxury for so she could have the best education and a head start in life, looked me dead in the eyes through the window and mouthed the words, "Get off my property." I was standing there with my wife, who was clutching her heart and gasping for air, realizing that our daughter hadn't just moved us out. She had effectively erased us from her life to make room for her own greedy ambitions. Was I wrong for the way I eventually chose to burn her world down to the ground to get our dignity back? Or would you have done the exact same thing if your child betrayed you in the most cold-blooded way imaginable? I really need you to listen to the whole story before you judge me, because what she did next was even worse than the eviction. To understand how we got to that rainy driveway, I have to take you back about 5 years. My wife, Martha, and I were always what you'd call doting parents. Our daughter, Sarah, was our only child, and maybe that was our first mistake. We poured everything into her. Every birthday was a grand celebration. Every minor achievement was met with a reward. When she wanted to go to an expensive private university that cost more than my annual salary, I didn't hesitate. I took on extra shifts at the warehouse, working 12-hour days until my joints screamed and my vision blurred from exhaustion. I remember the smell of that warehouse, dust, heavy machinery, and the metallic tang of old pallets, and I'd hold on to the image of Sarah's smiling face to get through the night. When she wanted a brand new car for her graduation because her old one was embarrassing in front of her wealthy friends, we dipped into our retirement fund because we wanted her to feel supported. Sarah was always bright, but as she grew older, a sharpness began to emerge, a sense of entitlement that we mistakenly labeled as strong-willed ambition. She landed a high-paying job in corporate real estate, a world where ruthlessness is a virtue, and she married a man named Julian who was just as cold and calculating as she was. He was the kind of man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. We were happy for her, truly. We thought we had succeeded as parents. We thought we had raised a woman who knew how to win. About 3 years ago, Sarah approached us with a brilliant idea during Sunday dinner. She spoke about the rising property taxes, the maintenance costs of an aging house, and the looming threat of inheritance laws. She argued that since the house was getting too big for just the two of us, we should sign the deed over to her immediately. She claimed it would be better for estate planning, and that she and Julian would move in to help us out. They promised to renovate the basement into a luxury suite, a private sanctuary just for us, and they would take care of all the bills so we could finally relax in our golden years. Martha was hesitant. She felt the walls of that house held our history, and giving away the deed felt like giving away our identity. She'd spent years picking out the perfect wallpaper for the hallway, and planting the rose bushes by the porch. But Sarah was so persuasive. She hugged us, cried a little, and told us she just wanted to make sure we were safe and cared for. She talked about the future, about grandbabies running through the halls, and how we'd always be the heart of the home. We trusted her. We signed those papers because we loved her more than we loved the bricks and mortar. For the first year, things seemed fine, but the atmosphere shifted slowly, like a poison leaking into the vents that you don't notice until you're already gasping for air. It started with small, passive-aggressive comments. Sarah would tell Martha that her traditional cooking smelled too old-fashioned and heavy, eventually suggesting that Martha shouldn't use the kitchen at all when they had important guests over. Martha would spend hours making her famous lasagna, only for Julian to push the plate away and say they were trying to maintain a clean-eating lifestyle. Then Julian started complaining that my old, comfortable recliner ruined the aesthetic of the newly renovated living room. We were slowly pushed further into the basement. They didn't just move us. They began treating us like unwanted tenants who were lucky to be there. They started charging us maintenance fees and utility contributions that conveniently stripped away our monthly Social Security checks. We were living in a beautiful house that we built with our own sweat. Yet we were afraid to walk into the hallway to get a glass of water after 8 p.m. because Julian would complain about the creaking floors disturbing his conference calls. Every interaction felt like a transaction. If I wanted to sit on the porch to watch the sunset, I'd get a look that said I was trespassing on their curated life. We felt like ghosts in our own home. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Sarah announced she was pregnant. We were overjoyed, thinking a grandchild would finally soften her heart and bring our family back together. I even started sketching out a plan for a hand-carved wooden crib in the garage. Instead, she looked at us across the dinner table with a cold, robotic stare and said, "The basement is going to be the new nursery and playroom. We've already looked at some assisted living facilities nearby. They're modest, but they'll suit you." My heart didn't just break. It felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. We told her we weren't going anywhere, that this was our home, and we had a right to be there. That's when the mask completely slipped. She laughed a short, sharp sound, and told us that legally, we had no rights. The house was in her name. She said we were cluttering up her perfect life, and that she was tired of looking at our aging, depressing faces every day. The tension escalated for weeks. Every day was a battlefield of silence and glares. Julian began accidentally misplacing our mail, and Sarah stopped including us in any meals. We were surviving on snacks kept in a mini fridge in the basement. Then came that fateful morning when we came back from a routine doctor's appointment for Martha's blood pressure. The key wouldn't turn. I thought maybe the lock was stuck, but then I saw the brand new digital keypad. She hadn't even given us a week's notice. She hadn't even given us a phone call. She just waited until we were gone and threw our entire lives, our photos, our clothes, our memories, into the yard. It started to drizzle, and I watched as the ink ran on the old letters Martha had saved from her mother. I saw my old toolkit, the one my father gave me, sitting open in the mud. We were forced to stay in a dingy, one-star motel on the edge of town, using what little cash I had hidden away in a shoebox under the floorboards of the garage. The only thing they didn't find. I watched my wife cry herself to sleep every single night, her health deteriorating rapidly because of the sheer shock and stress. She stopped eating. She just stared at the flickering neon sign outside our motel window. Sarah wouldn't take our calls. She blocked us on every social media platform. She was living in our house, sleeping in our room, enjoying the fruits of our 30 years of labor, while we were eating lukewarm canned soup in a room that smelled like stale cigarettes and regret. She thought she was untouchable. She thought we were just two old people who didn't have the strength to fight back. She truly believed that because we were her parents, we would eventually just roll over and die quietly to avoid making her look bad. But Sarah forgot one very important thing. In her haste to get the deed, she didn't realize that I had kept a very detailed paper trail. I had every receipt, every contract, and every bank statement from the renovations she demanded we pay for. More importantly, I knew a secret about the legal way she had acquired the property. You see, I had a friend from the old days, a man named Silas, a retired lawyer who knew the specifics of the contract we signed and the local laws better than anyone Julian could hire. Silas and I had spent 30 years fishing together. He wasn't just my lawyer, he was my brother in everything but blood. So that's the situation I was in. Homeless, betrayed by my own daughter, and watching my wife fade away while Sarah lived like a queen in our home. I had to make a choice. Do I walk away and die in poverty? Or do I use the one weapon I had left to dismantle the life she worked so hard to build? Before I tell you the absolute nuclear revenge I unleashed on her, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you forgive your child because they are your own blood? Or would you make them pay for every single tear and every sleepless night in that motel? I really want to know if you think there's a line a parent should never cross, even when pushed to the edge of the abyss. After 2 weeks of living in that motel, the sadness turned into a cold, hard anger. I stopped crying and started planning. I met with Silas in a small, dimly lit diner, and we went through the deed transfer with a magnifying glass. It turns out, in her arrogance and greed, Sarah had Julian draft the papers himself to save money on legal fees. They were so confident that we were too simple to notice the details. They had included a series of clauses to avoid certain property taxes and transfer fees. These clauses were, let's just say, highly creative and bordering on outright tax fraud. Julian had used his corporate real estate knowledge to find loopholes that weren't actually legal in our residential district. Furthermore, Silas found a specific provision about life estate rights that Sarah thought she had nullified with a secondary signature on page 12. However, because Julian had failed to have that specific page properly witnessed and notarized according to our state's strict Homeowner Protection Act, a law designed specifically to prevent the exploitation of the elderly, the transfer was technically incomplete and legally contestable. I didn't just go for the house though. I wanted her to feel the same crushing insecurity she made us feel. I did some digging and found out that Sarah had been using the house as collateral for a massive, multi-million-dollar business loan for Julian's failing tech startup. He was bleeding cash and desperate for a win. If the house went into legal limbo, their entire financial deck of cards would collapse instantly. I filed a massive lawsuit for elder abuse, fraud, and illegal eviction. But I didn't stop at the courtroom. I contacted the local news stations on your side segment. I told them the story of the corporate real estate rising star, who threw her sick, elderly parents onto the street in the rain. I showed them the pictures of our belongings on the gravel. The story went viral within hours. I saw people sharing it on Facebook, calling her a monster and a disgrace. Her firm, which prided itself on its family-first image and community trust, was absolutely horrified. Their phones were ringing off the hook with clients demanding to know if this was the kind of person they employed. The day of the court hearing was the first time I had seen Sarah since the eviction. She showed up looking smug, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than our motel stay, thinking her expensive city lawyers would easily bail her out. She walked past us in the hallway, smelling of expensive perfume, and whispered, "You're embarrassing yourself, Dad. Just give up." She didn't even look at her mother, who was sitting in a wheelchair because she was too weak to stand. But when Silas stood up and presented the evidence of the fraudulent tax filings, the improper notarization, and the testimony from 3 different neighbors who saw her dumping our belongings like garbage, the judge's face turned into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. The judge was an older woman who didn't take kindly to people who disrespected their elders. She looked at Sarah and Julian and said, "This is the most egregious case of predatory behavior I have seen in this courtroom in 20 years. The judge didn't just rule that the eviction was illegal, he took it a step further. He voided the deed transfer entirely due to undue influence, fraudulent misrepresentation, and a total failure to meet the legal requirements of the state. He ordered that we be given immediate access to the property, and that Sarah and Julian were to vacate within 48 hours. But the aftermath was even more devastating for her than I had imagined. Because of the publicity and the fraud label now attached to her name, Sarah was fired from her prestigious firm before she even left the courthouse. Julian's investors, terrified of the legal mess surrounding their collateral, pulled out of his startup the very next morning. They lost everything: their reputation, their income, and their social standing. The bank moved in to seize their luxury cars and assets to cover the defaulted loans. They went from being the local power couple to being completely broke and blacklisted in the industry. A month later, after we had moved back in and changed the locks ourselves, installing the most high-tech security system money could buy, Sarah showed up at our door. She wasn't wearing a designer suit anymore. Her hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and she was visibly pregnant. She was crying, gasping for breath, and begging for a place to stay. She had the audacity to ask if they could stay in the basement, the same basement she tried to kick us out of. She tried to play on our emotions, saying, "Think of your grandchild. You wouldn't want your own flesh and blood on the street, would you?" I looked at her through the security screen, the same way she had looked at me through that window. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just a cold emptiness. I remembered the rain on Martha's face. I remembered the motel room. I told her that she could find a modest apartment just like the one she had picked out for us, and that maybe the local social services could help her since she was so fond of suggesting them to us. I told her that our depressing faces didn't need to be part of her life anymore. I didn't let her in. I couldn't. Not after I had to watch Martha spend a week in the hospital with a stress-induced heart condition that almost took her from me. I closed the door and locked it. For the first time in years, I felt like the air in the house was clean again. The silence was no longer heavy with their insults. It was light with our peace. The victory was bittersweet, though. Martha and I are back in our home now, but it doesn't feel like the same place. It's quiet, and sometimes the silence is heavy with the ghost of the daughter we thought we had raised. I find myself looking at old baby pictures and wondering where that little girl went. Every time I walk past the basement door, I remember the look on her face when she told us we were cluttering her life. It's hard to live in a house that was turned into a prison. We decided we couldn't stay there permanently. The memories of the betrayal were soaked into the floorboards. We've sold the house, the real way this time, with a mountain of lawyers to ensure everything was perfect, and moved to a smaller, quieter place in a different state, somewhere near the coast where the air doesn't taste like betrayal. We used the remaining money to ensure we have the best medical care and a comfortable life, and the rest is going into a trust that will be donated to a charity for homeless seniors once we're gone. Sarah and Julian are currently living in a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a bad part of the city. Julian is working a low-level job he hates, and Sarah is struggling to find anyone in real estate who will even speak to her. They've stopped calling because they finally realized there's nothing left to take. No more retirement funds, no more equity, no more forgiveness. They tried to sue us one last time for emotional distress and loss of career, but the judge laughed them out of the office and ordered them to pay our legal fees. It's a tragedy, really. You spend your entire life building something for your children, sacrificing your own dreams so they can have theirs, only to realize that sometimes you're just building a weapon they'll eventually use to stab you in the back. The moral of this whole mess is that blood doesn't give you a license to be a monster, and respect isn't something you inherit through a birth certificate. It's something you earn and maintain every single day of your life. We tried to be the best parents we could be, but in the end, we had to be the best parents to ourselves. If you think I was right to take everything back and leave her to fend for herself after what she did, please like this video. It helps me feel like I'm not crazy for finally standing my ground against my own child. Subscribe for more stories like this where the truth finally comes out. And please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by ruining her career and leaving her with nothing? Or did she get exactly what she deserved for trying to destroy the people who gave her everything? I'll see you all in the next story.